This week on Vaticano, French Cardinal Philippe Barbarin submits his resignation to the Pope. Learn with us why the Holy Father hasn't accepted it. The Vatican's pediatric hospital, Bambino Gesù, celebrates its 150th anniversary. Discover how the hospital has been transformed from a room with 4 beds into the largest pediatric research center in Europe. And stay with us to meet Martin Mosebach, who shares his experience in Egypt among the families of the 21 Coptic Orthodox Christians beheaded at the hands of ISIS in 2015 in Libya. Join us for all this and more on this week's Vaticano. Cardinal Philippe Barbarin met with Pope Francis on March the 18th to submit his resignation as Archbishop of Lyon, France. The Cardinal made this decision after he was convicted by a French tribunal on March the 7th on charges of failing to report allegations of sexual abuse committed by a priest in his diocese. The Pope didn't accept the resignation, invoking the presumption of innocence. Papal spokesman Alessandro Gisotti commented on the Pope's decision.
Aware, however, of the difficulties currently facing the Archdiocese, the Holy Father has left Cardinal Barbarin free to make the most appropriate decision for his diocese. Cardinal Barbarin therefore decided to take a step back for a while and asked Father Yves Baumgarten, Vicar General, to take over the leadership of the diocese.
Cardinal Philippe Barbarin was given a 6-month suspended prison sentence, and now he plans to appeal the verdict. On the occasion of the 1150th anniversary of the death of St. Cyril, Pope Francis met a delegation of church leaders and parliamentarians from Slovakia and the Czech Republic. The Holy Father recalled that by bringing Christ to the land of the Slavic people, the Saint brothers Cyril and Methodius also brought the Cyrillic alphabet and helped to create a legal state of the Czech Republic and Slovakia.
In fact, the gospel does not weaken what is authentic in the different local cultures, but helps people and communities to recognize and realize the good, the truth, and the beauty.
The co-patrons of Europe, Saints Cyril and Methodius, evangelized the Slavic tribes in the 9th century, and soon after, Christianity spread quickly to the tribes, making the Slavic people now the biggest Christian ethnic group in Europe. On March the 21st, Pope Francis arrived at the Rome headquarters of the Scolas Occurrentes organization to launch the international project called Programming for Peace. During his Thursday afternoon visit, the Pope held a video conference connecting with young people from Panama, Portugal, Romania, and Italy. The Holy Father listened to young people and spoke with them in a very informal and family-like way. Then, together with some young people, the Pope launched the Programming for Peace project. The aim of this project is to enable millions of young people to learn how to use new technologies from an ethical point of view and to commit themselves to the search for peace, pointing out that young people need good examples to be guided. At the conclusion, the Pope said that Scolas is an organization that leads youth and sows good seeds in them.
Young people are not the future. We must correct this expression. Young people are the present, today, because if we think that young people are in the future, today, what are young people? The meantime? In this way, they lose their strength, they lose their aspiration, and end up being domesticated, badly domesticated. Young people are our present, and they must be able to participate actively now, and be able to express themselves positively through their own creativity.
The Scolas Occurrentes Foundation is an international organization created by Pope Francis in 2013. It's now present in 190 countries, and it's currently the largest student movement in the world. This year, the Vatican's children's hospital, Bambino Gesù, is celebrating its 150th anniversary. For the occasion, the head of the Bambino Gesù, Mariella Enoch, the president of Italy, Sergio Mattarella, and the Vatican's Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, came together at one of the campuses in Rome. The Cardinal brought Pope Francis's blessing and wished that the hospital would continue its mission, which is the constant attention to the human person. The hospital was founded in 1869 on the initiative of the Dukes of Salviati. The new hospital was opened to cure children, and among the first personnel were the Daughters of Mercy of St. Vincent de Paul. During the pontificate of Pope Pius XI in 1924, the Bambino Gesù Hospital came into possession of the Holy See, becoming truly the Pope's hospital, and also an extraterritorial zone of the Holy See. The popes have been frequent visitors here. For example, St. John XXIII visited the hospital in Christmas of 1958, surprising the little patients who thought he was Santa Claus. St. Paul VI gave the hospital a new building in a small town near Rome, Polidoro. The tradition was continued by St. Pope John Paul II and by Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, who visited the hospital several times. Pope Francis has allowed for the use of his helicopter, once exclusively for the Pope, to transport children in grave conditions to the hospital. In its 150 years of history, the Bambino Gesù Hospital has been transformed from a room with 4 beds into the largest pediatric research center in Europe and one of the most modern centers of healthcare for children worldwide. Get ready to take a look at Holy See diplomacy in action. Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano.
A few weeks ago, the UN Geneva Library and the Geneva Center organized this discussion group entitled Leadership in Modern Multilateralism. According to the panel, multilateralism is the most logical approach to the challenges the world is facing in our time of fast-paced globalization.
Yet, many people have lost confidence, not only in their leaders and governments, but also in global institutions, including the United Nations. Multilateralism is challenged by nationalist and isolationist politics of fear and resentment. We find ourselves at a crossroads today, at a moment in time in which 2 very different visions of the world compete with each other. One optimistic, focused on everyone's success, the other pessimistic, focused only on one's own advantage. 2 different stories, 2 different narratives about who we are and how should we respond.
Multilateralism is a very multifaceted theme. And that's why we thought we cut this interview in 2 pieces. So this is part 1 of the interview. Professor Dr. Alfred de Zayas, a Catholic, an American lawyer and historian, and independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order, expressed his opinion on the subject matter. Now, there are a few definitions of multilateralism. Miles Carler, for example, a political scientist, defined it as international governance or global governance of the many. Isn't that exactly what so many people fear or are opposed to, that the United Nations could become a global, a world government? Can that happen?
Well, I don't think it's a good definition. I think that multilateralism implies multilateral diplomacy for peace, for cooperation, for the sustainable development goals, for positive things, but never as globalism or as world government. What we're talking about is cooperation on the basis of consensus. That is, states agree to cooperate. The culture of dialogue, the culture of multilateralism is something that should be promoted, and indeed, our Pope, Franciscus, he has always been an advocate of multilateralism, and he said so in so many words. You remember his speech to the diplomatic corps in the Vatican, beginning 2019, reminding them that it's exactly 100 years since that first attempt at multilateralism was carried out, the foundation of the League of Nations.
Professor de Zayas admonished to read the small print of issues in the context of multilateralism, such as the Global Compact for Migration.
Which sounds like a good plan to regulate, to control, but there are many countries already that, like Austria and Hungary and so forth, that are opposed to that.
With good reason. Read how to implement Goal 17. The moment you bring in the big stick of criminal law, that leads to censorship and it leads to self-censorship. So it's dangerous. But that does not mean that multilateral diplomacy in the context of migration is not necessary. Of course it is.
This panel speaker expressed his belief that giving the UN, for example, a handle on domestic policies would be perhaps not a good idea.
As multilateralism includes domestic policy evaluation in its purview, it must also become increasingly people-driven. In fact, the current outburst of populism springs from the feeling that ordinary people are kept out of the search for solutions that concern them to problems that Kofi Annan used to call problems without passports. And I refer to pandemics, to environmental degradation, non-proliferation, immigration, etc.
The panelists agreed that despite mounting nationalism and criticism, that there is no valid alternative to international cooperation, multilateralism, and that it must be driven by responsible leadership personalities.
Stay with us. In a few moments, Martin Mosebach will share his journey into the land of the Coptic Martyrs. More on Vaticano begins now.
I'm joined here today by Martin Mosebach, the author of the recently published book, The 21, A Journey into the Land of the Coptic Martyrs. This book examines the lives of the 21 Coptic Orthodox Christians who were kidnapped and beheaded at the hands of ISIS in 2015 in Libya. And Mr. Mosebach is going to share a little bit more what he discovered in writing his book. Thank you for being here with us today.
Good morning.
Good morning. The video that ISIS released in 2015 with the beheading of the 21 men in orange jumpsuits was entitled, "A Message Signed with Blood to the Nation of the Cross." However, you discuss in your book how this video brought an unintended message, that of the witness of these martyrs who died with the name of Jesus on their lips. I'm wondering if you could tell us more about how this message resonated across the Middle East and beyond to the rest of the world.
In der ganzen Welt wurde dieser Film gesehen, dieses Video, und es hat natürlich...
This film, this video, has been seen in the whole world with horror and disgust, of course, and I'm sure that this was also the reaction it stirred in many in the Middle East. Egyptian Christians, however, saw this video with different eyes. They saw it as a precious, rare document of martyrdom as the most striking feature of the Coptic Church. The Coptic Church considers itself a church of martyrs. They're proud of their martyrs, and thus they considered it as a continuation of martyrdom, a continuation of the readiness to bear witness to Christ.
Now, before writing this book, you traveled to Egypt and actually met with the families of the martyrs. What message did they share with you, the families of the martyrs and the communities who had lost their loved ones to ISIS?
These meetings were indeed extraordinary. They are poor people, not living in utter misery, but people who live in a very humble way, small farmers. And many of them have now lost their breadwinner. Since these men used to send money to their families, their children, their wives, their elderly relatives back at home. But still, these people talked with such peacefulness, such pride of the fact that their family had produced a martyr, someone ready to make the ultimate sacrifice in defense of the faith. I've noticed that this readiness to bear witness to the Christian faith is particularly widespread in the villages of mainly rural Upper Egypt, where some regions are almost exclusively Christian. And I'm talking of young people, young men and women in their 20s, who told me that they would gladly become martyrs, in the same way as an American, a German child might say, "I'd like to become an astronaut." This readiness was really there, and it was seen as something which gives you energy, fills you with pride and joy.
I know several of these martyrs were in their early 20s. Was there something in examining their lives and their formation in the Coptic Orthodox faith that you saw that gave them the strength to sacrifice their lives for Christ at that moment?
Die koptische Kirche ist sehr gut organisiert.
In terms of religious education, the Coptic Church is very well organized, at least since the 20th century. Since that time, the Coptic Church has adopted the habit of Sunday school after the liturgical education of the young people. A young Copt knows what he or she believes in. I've often noticed that the Christian faith is a very complex thing, and not many Christians know their religion, but the Copts do. And then they have this long and splendid liturgy, which they celebrate every Sunday. The martyrs, the young people, knew it by heart because they were also church singers, singers ordained by the bishop. So you can say they've spent a great part of their lives and almost all of their leisure time in the church. They were young people who had based their whole lives on the church, on faith.
And the Coptic Orthodox community in Egypt as a whole has faced ongoing persecutions in the last few years. With devastating church bombings and other acts of terrorism committed. What attitude did you find among this Christian community in Egypt and how they faced this continuing persecution?
Man muss eines wissen. In den letzten Jahren,
we must bear one thing in mind. In recent years, in the wake of the so-called Arabellion, with President Mubarak overthrown and President Morsi arrested, the Muslim Brotherhood, the current hidden civil war in Egypt, persecution, destruction, and attacks against Christians have gotten worse. But for the Copts, this is nothing new. The actual situation is very difficult, that's true, but the Copts have a history of 1,400 years of oppression. The recent years are nothing more than a new chapter in a very long period of time. The Copts lost their civil rights with the Islamic conquest. There have always been waves of persecution and destruction. They're used to it.
Now, you wrote in your book that in your conversations with the families, not once did the concept of revenge or justice for the executioners came up. How is forgiveness a part of the story of these Coptic martyrs?
Noch etwas Überraschendes. Von Vergebung war in diesen Familien.
In fact, that's another astounding aspect. There was no talk of forgiveness at all in these families. There was no talk of revenge, no talk of justice. There were no demands to support the Christian communities, to help and protect them. Let me put it this way. The persecutors simply didn't exist. They had no face. And indeed, they had worn face masks. Their whole attitude was that of being simply messengers of Satan. It's the eternal story. The Christians are in the world to fight the good fight. And in every century, they have to face new challenges, new temptations. And this is only one in a long chain. The individuals behind the persecutors were of no interest to them. I would say they lived in a world completely orientated towards the afterlife. And maybe they didn't even perceive these persecutors as individuals, but rather expressions of an evil power.
Nur Ausdruck einer bösen Macht.
And here we are in Rome. It's a city filled with the relics of Christian martyrs throughout the centuries. I'm wondering, in your research, what similarities did you find between these modern martyrs killed at the hands of ISIS and the Christian martyrs throughout the centuries whom we revere?
Das ist auch das Großartige gewesen.
That's exactly what was so great about it. The whole attitude of these families, the attitude of the martyrs themselves, reminds us so strongly of the martyrs of the first centuries, of how the early Christian community reacted in the face of persecution. And the communities from Upper Egypt reacted in exactly the same way to modern persecution at the hands of ISIS, or hostile Muslim neighbors. For them, it's the story of a victory. They don't pity their martyrs, and neither do we. In Roman churches, they're depicted with a crown on their heads and a palm branch of victory in their hands. And this hasn't changed. Even if nowadays we often have quite naive photo collages, the martyrs are depicted as priests in a chasuble, as deacons, and with a crown on their head. This is the very same look of the first centuries, the authentic look early Christianity had on martyrdom.
And as one final question, what is the greatest lesson that you think you will take away from spending time with the persecuted Christian community in Egypt?
My greatest lesson is that martyrdom has the function of working as a fifth gospel. The evangelists were all martyrs, and when the first Christian martyrs entered the scene, the Gospels hadn't yet been written. The martyrs are the true messengers of the Christian faith, and as long as they are martyrs, we don't have to worry about the Church. This is very important, especially today, in a time where the image of the Catholic Church has been tarnished, and where there are great doubts, especially in the Western world, as far as its responsibilities, its leaders are concerned. The most important thing are not the bishops, the cardinals, and not even the Pope. The most important thing are the martyrs.
A beautiful message to end on. Thank you so much for sharing this moving story of the 21 Coptic martyrs with us today.
Thank you.